The baby's cries echoed through the small New York hospital room. No nurse could calm him, only Cynthia, the young maid who held him close, whispering through her tears. Then the door opened. A tall man in a dark suit walked in, his face cold, his eyes full of anger. Daniel Wilson, the billionaire she once worked for. The man she said was the father. Cynthia's heart pounded as he stepped closer. The air went still. "So this is your trick?" Daniel said quietly. "You think I'll fall for it?" She didn't answer. She only turned the baby toward him. Daniel looked once and froze. The baby's eyes, gray and familiar, stared back at him, the same eyes he saw every morning in his mirror. For a moment, everything went silent. His breath caught, his pride slipped, and fear crept in. Because deep down, he knew the truth was looking right at him. Cynthia held her breath as Daniel turned away. He didn't speak. He just stood by the window, his hand on his head, breathing hard. The city lights from outside painted his face with a dull glow. For a man used to controlling everything, this was one thing he couldn't control. The nurse in the corner quietly walked out, closing the door behind her. Only the sound of the baby's soft breathing filled the room. "Daniel," Cynthia said in a trembling voice, "I didn't come here to shame you. I just thought you had the right to know." He turned sharply. "Right to know what? That you ruined my name? That you're using this child to get attention?" Cynthia's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed calm. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to raise a baby alone, with no one to help me?" Daniel's jaw tightened. His voice dropped lower. "I told you months ago. I don't believe you. I gave you money to handle it, but you wanted a story, didn't you?" She looked at him, tired and hurt. "Money can't buy a child's life, Daniel, and it can't buy peace either." Her words hit him, but he didn't show it. He straightened his tie, trying to hold his pride together. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. Cynthia looked down at the baby, her voice soft. "Maybe. But one day, when he's old enough, I'll tell him everything. I'll tell him his father had his eyes, but not his heart." Daniel's breath caught. For a second, his face changed. Something human flickered there, something like guilt, but it vanished just as quickly. He turned toward the door, saying nothing. When he reached for the handle, Cynthia said quietly, "You can hate me, Daniel, but don't hate him. He never asked for this." Her voice cracked at the end, and it hung in the air like a whisper that refused to fade. Daniel paused, but he didn't turn back. He walked out of the room, leaving her in the quiet glow of the night. Outside, Daniel's driver waited near the black car parked by the curb. The rain had started again, light and cold. As Daniel stepped into the car, his driver noticed his pale face. "Sir, are you all right?" the man asked carefully. Daniel nodded once, staring out the window. "Drive," he said. The city lights moved past like ghosts. In the reflection, Daniel saw something he couldn't unsee those eyes. The baby's eyes. The same gray color he inherited from his late father. Only 1 in 1,000 had it, and now that same look was staring back from a newborn he swore wasn't his. He tried to push the thought away, but guilt crept in like a slow chill. Back in the hospital, Cynthia sat by the window, her baby resting in her arms. She whispered softly, "Don't cry, Ethan. Mommy's here." The name came out naturally, a name she had chosen the moment she felt him kick for the first time. She remembered the night she lost her job. The night Daniel shouted at her and called her a liar. It played in her head over and over. "Get out of my mansion, Cynthia. Don't ever come back." She remembered standing outside his gate with her small bag, the wind cold against her face. No money, no family in the city, just her and the small heartbeat growing inside her. She had begged him to listen, but his pride had been louder than her tears. Now, months later, She looked at her baby and whispered, "We made it." Across town, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, the fireplace still burning though he felt no warmth. The image of that baby wouldn't leave his mind. He poured himself another drink, his hands slightly trembling. "It can't be," he said to himself. "She's lying." But even as he said it, he didn't believe his own words. He opened the old drawer of his desk and pulled out a small photo frame. Inside was a picture of his father, same gray eyes, same cold stare. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a kind of fear that no money could fix. He thought of the woman he'd thrown out, of the child born without his name, and something deep inside him began to ache. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, but the baby's face flashed again, small, innocent, and carrying the eyes he could never deny. Somewhere in the city, a mother and child were fighting to survive because of him. And for the first time, the silence in his mansion felt heavier than ever. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital room slowly emptied. The nurses stopped whispering when Cynthia passed by, but the looks never went away. People in the hallway still pointed, some in pity, others in quiet judgment. When the bill came, she folded the paper and held it to her chest. The number scared her, but she refused to cry again. She looked at her baby, sleeping in the small crib beside her bed, his fingers wrapped around her thumb. "It's all right, Ethan," she whispered. "Mommy will figure it out." She had nothing left from her job at Daniel's mansion, only the clothes she wore and a few dollars in her purse. The rest had gone to food and small bus rides across New York while she searched for work. The day she was discharged, the sky was gray and cold. She wrapped Ethan in a thin blanket and stepped outside, holding him close to her chest. Every step she took felt heavy, but she kept walking. On the other side of the city, Daniel sat behind the long glass desk in his office, but his mind wasn't there. He stared at a document for almost an hour without reading a single line. His assistant stood at the door, waiting. "Sir, the investors are asking for your approval," she said softly. Daniel blinked, looking up. "Tell them I'll call back," he muttered. She hesitated, then nodded and left. The moment the door closed, Daniel leaned back in his chair and covered his face with his hands. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the baby again, the same eyes, the same silence that haunted him. He told himself it was just coincidence, but deep down he knew it wasn't. Later that night, he poured himself another drink and stood by the large window of his penthouse. The city below glittered with life, but all he felt was emptiness. He remembered the sound of Cynthia's voice, trembling but honest. "You can hate me, Daniel, but don't hate him." Those words kept replaying like a broken record. Meanwhile, Cynthia had found a small room to rent in an old building in Brooklyn. The walls were thin, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the heater barely worked, but it was better than the streets. She laid Ethan on the bed and watched him sleep. His small chest rose and fell with peace she didn't have. Her neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hernandez, knocked on the door one evening. "You need anything, Mija?" she asked kindly. Cynthia smiled weakly. "I'm fine, thank you." The woman looked at the baby and smiled. "He's beautiful. Those eyes, they look like the sky after a storm." Cynthia looked down, her heart tightening. "Yes, they do." Mrs. Hernandez handed her a small bowl of soup. "Eat. You need strength. Babies feel everything you feel." Cynthia took the bowl, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." The woman waved her hand. "Just take care of him. That's enough." As months passed, Cynthia started working at a small diner nearby. The pay was low, the hours were long, but it helped her buy milk and diapers. She left Ethan with Mrs. Hernandez during her shifts, promising she would never be gone too long. At night, she sat by the window with her baby in her arms, whispering stories to him. One day, she said softly. "You'll know the truth. You'll know your name means strong." Sometimes, when Ethan smiled, she saw Daniel in his face and felt her chest tighten. She tried to forget, but some memories refused to fade. She remembered his voice, his anger, and his eyes when he looked at her like she was nothing. She had begged him to listen, but his pride had built a wall higher than his mansion. Still, she never spoke badly of him to anyone. She just worked harder and loved her son deeper. Back in Manhattan, Daniel's nights were sleepless. He started showing up late to meetings. His staff noticed, but no one dared to speak. He snapped at everyone, including his lawyer, who reminded him about the incident that had started spreading online. "Sir," the lawyer said carefully, "someone took a picture at the hospital. The press is starting to talk." Daniel looked up sharply. "What picture?" The lawyer placed a tablet on the desk. A blurry image filled the screen, Cynthia holding a baby in her hospital gown. The caption read, "Ex-maid claims billionaire fathered her child." Daniel's stomach turned. He threw the tablet aside and stood up. "Get it removed," he said coldly. "It's too late," the lawyer replied. "People have already shared it. They're asking questions." Daniel's hands trembled slightly. "Do whatever you have to do," he said. "I don't want to hear another word about this woman." But even as he said it, he couldn't stop seeing the baby's face. By morning, the story had reached television screens. News anchors mentioned Cynthia's name. Her photo appeared next to Daniel's. Social media buzzed with people calling her a liar, others defending her, and many wondering who was telling the truth. Cynthia found out when she arrived at work. Her manager looked at her strangely. "You're that girl from the news, right?" Cynthia froze, her tray shaking in her hands. "Please, I just need this job," she said quietly. The man sighed. "I'm sorry, Cynthia, but we can't have trouble here. People talk, you understand." She didn't argue. She only nodded and left, holding back her tears until she reached the street. That night, she sat on the floor of her small room, holding Ethan close. The lights flickered, the rain tapped on the window, and her tears finally came. She whispered, "One day, they'll see. One day, they'll know you're not a lie." In his penthouse, Daniel sat alone, staring at his reflection in the dark window. The city outside didn't look so bright anymore. His phone buzzed non-stop, reporters, investors, old friends, all wanting answers. He ignored them all. He couldn't stop thinking about the baby's eyes. Every time he blinked, they were there, haunting him like a mirror he couldn't escape. He picked up the drink beside him, but his hand shook too much to bring it to his lips. He set it down and whispered, "What if she was telling the truth?" The words felt strange in his mouth. For the first time, he couldn't lie to himself. That night, while New York's rain washed the streets clean, two people sat awake, one in wealth, one in struggle, both trapped by the same truth neither could run from. And though miles apart, their thoughts met in silence. Because somewhere deep inside, both knew the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning light crept into the penthouse, but Daniel Wilson hadn't slept. His phone kept buzzing on the table beside him, each vibration another reminder that his private life was no longer private. The TV was on, low volume, but he could still hear his name being spoken by strangers. "Billionaire Daniel Wilson accused of denying his maid's child," the reporter said. "Public opinion is split, as photos of the baby show a shocking resemblance." Daniel turned off the TV and pressed his hands against his face. His company's shares had dropped overnight. Investors were calling, partners were panicking, and his lawyer had warned that silence might make him look guilty. But the noise outside wasn't what haunted him. It was the silence inside. No matter how many times he told himself he was right, the image of the baby's gray eyes kept returning, breaking every excuse he tried to build. In Brooklyn, Cynthia sat by the window of her small room, holding her son in her arms. The news had reached her too. She saw her face flashing across the screen in the diner, across the street, while people pointed and whispered. Some believed her, some didn't, but she didn't care anymore. All that mattered was Ethan, whose tiny hand gripped her finger as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. Mrs. Hernandez came in quietly with a small bag of groceries. "You shouldn't watch those things, mija," she said kindly. "People talk, but truth never hides forever." Cynthia smiled weakly. "I know. It just hurts sometimes." The old woman touched her shoulder. "Pain doesn't last, but good hearts do. You keep walking. One day he'll see what he lost." Cynthia looked at her baby and whispered, "Maybe one day he'll see what he left behind too." Back in Manhattan, Daniel's office was no longer the quiet space it used to be. His assistant entered, holding a folder. "Sir, the board wants an explanation. They said the company's image is in danger." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Tell them I'll handle it." "Handle it how?" she asked softly. "Sir, this isn't just business anymore. People want the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "There is no truth to tell." But as she walked out, his chest tightened again. He couldn't breathe the same air without remembering the baby's eyes, the way they looked at him like he was the only person in the world who should know better. That night, Daniel sat alone in his study. The lights were dim, and the city outside felt far away. He opened his drawer and pulled out the photo of his father again. The resemblance between the baby and that man was undeniable. He whispered to himself, "What if I was wrong?" It was a small question, but it cracked something inside him. For years he had built his life on control, on rules, on never being questioned. But this time, his own heart was asking questions he couldn't silence. The next morning, Daniel found himself standing in front of a small private clinic. He had told his driver to wait. He went inside and spoke quietly to a nurse. "I need a DNA test," he said. The nurse nodded, not recognizing who he was. "Do you have the child's sample?" Daniel paused, his voice low. "Not yet, but I will." He walked out, his heart pounding in his chest. The thought of facing Cynthia again felt heavier than any business deal he had ever made. Meanwhile, Cynthia was sitting on a park bench, rocking Ethan gently in her arms. The autumn air was cool, and the trees had begun to change color. She hummed softly to him, pretending for a moment that the world was kind. A young woman approached her, holding a small microphone. "Excuse me, are you Cynthia Williams?" Cynthia froze. "Who are you?" "I'm from Channel 8 News," the woman said. "I just wanted to hear your side of the story. The world already knows his." Cynthia looked down at her son and then back at the reporter. "You want a story? The story is simple. I loved my job. I respected him, and I trusted him. But when I needed him most, he turned his back on me." The reporter's eyes softened. "Do you have anything to say to him now?" Cynthia looked at the camera for a moment, then said quietly, "No, I don't need to say anything. One day, the truth will speak for itself." That night, Daniel saw the interview. He had been trying to ignore the media, but when her face appeared on the screen, he couldn't look away. Her voice wasn't angry, it was calm, too calm, and that made it hurt even more. He turned off the TV, but the silence that followed was unbearable. The next morning, he called his driver and said, "Take me to Brooklyn." The driver hesitated. "Sir, is that wise? The press might follow." Daniel's voice was firm. "Just drive." Cynthia was at home feeding Ethan when she heard a knock at the door. She thought it was Mrs. Hernandez again, but when she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Daniel stood there, dressed simply this time, without his usual pride. His eyes looked tired, his voice low. "Can I come in?" Cynthia didn't answer right away. She looked at him, then at the baby in her arms. "Why are you here?" "I just need to talk," he said quietly. She stepped aside slowly, still unsure if she should. He walked in, looking around at the small room. It was nothing like the mansion he lived in, but it was warm. It smelled like milk, soap, and real life. He looked at the baby in her arms, then at her. "What's his name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Ethan." Daniel nodded once. "That's a strong name." Cynthia didn't smile. "You didn't come here to compliment me. What do you want?" He took a deep breath. "I need a DNA test." Her expression hardened. "After all this time, after you called me a liar in front of everyone, now you want proof?" He looked down. "I have to know." Cynthia stood silent for a moment. Then she walked over to the crib and gently laid Ethan down. "If you think a test will give you peace, then do it," she said softly. "But don't come back here if you're not ready for the truth." Daniel looked at her, but there was no anger in her face anymore, only strength. He nodded, his throat dry. "I'll send someone tomorrow," he said. As he left, he turned one last time and saw Ethan staring at him from the crib. For a second, their eyes met again, gray, clear, and identical. Daniel stepped outside, but he couldn't walk straight. His heart felt heavy, his pride cracking with every step. That night, back in his penthouse, he poured himself a drink and sat quietly. For the first time, he realized that no amount of money or power could erase what he had done. The test might tell him what he already knew, but what he feared most was not the result, it was the man he had become. And as rain began to fall over New York again, Daniel whispered to himself, "If he's mine, then maybe it's time I learn what being a father really means." The morning came with rain, the kind that made the whole city gray. Cynthia sat by the window, holding Ethan as he slept against her chest. She hadn't closed her eyes all night. Every few minutes, she looked at the phone on the small table, wondering if today would be the day she finally learned the truth everyone else was waiting to hear. A nurse had come the day before to collect samples for the DNA test. Cynthia hadn't asked questions. She only signed the papers, kissed her baby's head, and whispered, "Whatever happens, I'll still love you." Across town, Daniel Wilson sat in his office, staring at the same rain falling against the glass. The envelope with the test result lay unopened on his desk. He had told himself he'd read it later, but it felt heavier than any file he had ever touched. He reached for it, his hands shaking slightly. For a man used to signing billion-dollar deals without blinking, that moment felt harder than anything he had ever faced. He opened it slowly and read the words he already knew deep down. Probability of paternity. 99.9%. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his breath leaving him in silence. For a long time he didn't move. He stared at the paper until the ink began to blur. He had denied her, humiliated her, and thrown her out like she was nothing, but the truth was written in front of him now. The baby was his. He put his hands over his face and whispered, "What have I done?" News spread faster than the rain could fall. Within hours, the internet exploded with headlines. DNA test confirms billionaire fathered Maid's child. Reporters gathered outside Daniel's building. Cameras flashed, people shouted his name, and security struggled to hold the crowd back. Inside, Daniel stood near the window, watching the chaos below. He had always been the man everyone admired, but now people were seeing him for who he truly was. His lawyer walked in, holding his phone. "Sir, you have to make a statement. The company's stock is dropping. Investors are pulling out." Daniel didn't look at him. "Let them." "Let them? Sir, this could destroy your entire empire." Daniel turned slowly. His face was calm, but his voice was low. "It's already destroyed. I did that myself." The lawyer stared at him, speechless, then left without another word. Later that night, Daniel called a press conference. Cameras filled the room. Reporters waited with notebooks ready, expecting another denial. But when Daniel stepped up to the microphone, he looked different. There was no pride left in his eyes. He cleared his throat. "I've made mistakes," he said quietly. "I denied the truth because of pride. I hurt someone who never deserved it. And I refused to accept responsibility for my own actions." The reporters whispered among themselves, surprised by his tone. Daniel continued, "The DNA test confirmed what I already knew in my heart. The child is mine. His name is Ethan Wilson." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "To his mother, Cynthia, I owe an apology that words will never be enough for. To the public, I have nothing to hide. I will accept whatever comes." When he stepped away from the microphone, flashes filled the room, but for the first time, Daniel didn't hide from them. In her small Brooklyn room, Cynthia watched the conference on the old television Mrs. Hernandez had given her. Her hands shook as she held her son. Daniel's face filled the screen. He looked broken, smaller somehow, like a man stripped of his walls. Mrs. Hernandez wiped her eyes with a tissue. "He finally said it, mija. He told the truth." Cynthia didn't answer. Her throat felt tight. "It took him too long," she said softly. "Yes," the old woman nodded, "but sometimes truth walks slow." Cynthia looked at Ethan. His tiny eyes blinked sleepily. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him," she whispered. "Forgiveness is not for him," Mrs. Hernandez said. "It's for you, so your heart can rest." The next morning, Daniel went to see Cynthia. No cameras, no guards, just him. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, a man far from the suits he used to hide behind. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, she froze. "I saw your face on TV," she said quietly. "So now the world knows." Daniel nodded. "They do. But I didn't come for them." "Then why are you here?" He looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. "To tell you I'm sorry. Not for the cameras, not for my name. Just sorry." Cynthia crossed her arms, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you did to me? You made me feel like I was dirt. You left me to face everything alone." Daniel's eyes watered, but he didn't look away. "I know, and I'll live with that shame for the rest of my life. I can't change what I did, but I can try to make things right now." She sighed heavily, turning her face away. "You think an apology fixes everything?" "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't, but maybe time will." For a long moment, there was silence. The baby in the crib made a small sound, breaking it. Daniel looked at him, his heart twisting. He walked closer, stopping just a step away. "Can I hold him?" he asked softly. Cynthia hesitated, then nodded slowly. She lifted Ethan and placed him carefully in Daniel's arms. Daniel's hands shook as he held his son for the first time. The small weight against his chest felt like a mirror pressed to his soul. Ethan blinked up at him, calm, curious, innocent. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "He looks so much like my father," he whispered. Cynthia watched silently, unsure what to feel. She wanted to hate him, but the sight of that man holding the child he once denied made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. Daniel looked at her. "I don't expect forgiveness, but please let me help. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Cynthia shook her head. "You can't just walk back in like nothing happened. Trust doesn't come that easy." "I know," he said, gently rocking the baby. "Then I'll earn it, no matter how long it takes." She didn't reply. She just watched him as he stood there, holding Ethan like something fragile and precious. For the first time since the night she left his mansion, Daniel didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man trying to find his way back to being human. Hours later, after he left, Cynthia sat by the window again, holding Ethan. The city outside was still loud, still cruel, But something inside her had shifted. She whispered to her baby, "Maybe people can change. Maybe—" Across town, Daniel sat in his car, staring at his hands. They still felt the warmth of his son's small body. The truth had cost him everything. His company, his image, his peace, but in losing it all, he had found something real. He closed his eyes and said softly, "Tomorrow, I'll go back. Not as the man I was, but as the father he needs." Weeks passed quietly after that day. The noise of the media faded little by little, replaced by new scandals and stories. But for Cynthia, peace did not come easily. Every time she saw Daniel's face on television, her stomach tightened. The world praised him for his confession, but only she knew the pain behind it. Still, he kept his word. Daniel began visiting the small apartment in Brooklyn every week. He didn't come with gifts, cameras, or promises. He came alone, carrying milk, diapers, or sometimes nothing but time. At first, Cynthia barely spoke to him. She would hand him the baby, sit quietly, and watch. He never complained. He just held Ethan, fed him, or rocked him to sleep. One afternoon, as he placed the baby gently in the crib, Cynthia said, "You don't have to keep coming." Daniel looked up at her. "I know I don't, but I want to." She crossed her arms, unsure how to feel. "You've already lost your company. People turned against you. Why are you still here?" He sighed, his voice quiet. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that feels right. I don't care about what I lost anymore. I care about what I almost threw away." His words sank into the air like soft rain. Cynthia didn't answer. She looked at him for a long time, searching for the pride she once saw in him. It wasn't there anymore. Over time, Daniel began to change. The suits disappeared. The phone calls stopped. He found work helping at a local youth foundation, the same one that once received donations from his company. No one there treated him like a billionaire. He swept floors, carried boxes, and learned to listen instead of command. He didn't tell Cynthia about it, but word reached her anyway. Mrs. Hernandez saw him one morning at the community center and came rushing to tell her. "Mija," the old woman said, "that man of yours, he's different now. I saw him helping the kids, cleaning tables with his own hands. You should see it yourself." Cynthia smiled faintly, half in disbelief. "Maybe he's trying to make up for his past." "Maybe," Mrs. Hernandez said, "but sometimes trying means more than saying sorry." That evening, Daniel came by again. Ethan was crawling now, giggling on the floor. Daniel sat with him, letting the baby tug at his fingers. The sound of Ethan's laugh filled the small room, and for a moment, it didn't matter that they came from two different worlds. Cynthia watched them silently. "He likes you," she said softly. Daniel smiled. "I like him too." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you miss your old life?" Daniel looked at her and shook his head. "That life had walls, money, and silence. This one has noise, mess, and truth. I'd rather have this." Cynthia's eyes watered. "You don't even sound like the same man." He nodded. "I'm not. The old me was empty." There was a long pause. Ethan crawled toward his mother and reached up for her arms. She lifted him and kissed his cheek. "Maybe we can start over," she said quietly. Daniel looked surprised. "Start over?" "Not as lovers," she said quickly, "but as parents, as people trying to raise this child right." Daniel nodded slowly, a small smile forming on his face. "I can live with that." Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. They shared small moments, Ethan's first steps, his first word, and his first birthday. Daniel bought nothing fancy, only a small cake and a candle. They celebrated together in the little apartment, laughing as the baby smeared frosting on his face. After everyone left, the room grew quiet again. Daniel stood by the window, watching the city lights. "You know," he said softly. "Before I met you, I thought power was everything. I thought love was weakness. I was wrong." Cynthia looked at him, her voice calm. "Love isn't weakness, Daniel. It's what keeps people alive." He nodded slowly. "I learned that too late." "No," she said gently. "You learned it when you were ready." For a moment, they just stood there in silence, the soft sound of Ethan breathing filling the room. A year later, Daniel invited Cynthia and Ethan to a small event at the community foundation. It wasn't a grand ceremony, just a gathering of people who had been helped by the new program he created, one that provided jobs for single mothers. When Cynthia arrived, she looked around the bright hall filled with laughter. Daniel stood at the podium, speaking to the crowd. "I built companies that changed the world," he said. "But I never built anything that changed me. It took losing everything to understand what really matters. We talk about success, but true success is when you lift others up with you." People clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Cynthia stood quietly in the back, holding Ethan. For the first time, she saw not the man who had hurt her, but the man who had learned from it. When the event ended, Daniel walked over, smiling. "You came." She nodded. "I wanted to see if you meant everything you said." He laughed softly. "Did I pass your test?" She looked at him, her eyes warm. "You're still learning. But yes, you did." He looked down at Ethan, who was now toddling around their feet. "He's growing fast." "He's growing strong," Cynthia said proudly. Daniel knelt beside his son. "That's all I ever wanted for him." Ethan looked up, his tiny voice trying to form a word. "Duh," he said softly, reaching for Daniel's hand. Daniel froze, his heart skipping. "What did you say?" Cynthia smiled, tears in her eyes. "He said Dad." For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. He lifted the boy in his arms, his eyes filling with tears. "I'll never let you down again," he whispered. Cynthia watched them together, her heart finally at peace. That night, as they walked out of the foundation, the city lights shimmered above them. The same city that once tore them apart now seemed to hold them together. Cynthia turned to Daniel and said quietly, "You know, I used to hate this city. Too loud, too cruel. But maybe it's not the place that's cruel. Maybe it's the people who forget how to care." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then let's be the ones who remember." She nodded. "For him." He looked at her, and then at the little boy sleeping in his arms. "For all of us." They walked down the quiet street together, not as Maid and Billionaire anymore, but as two people forever changed by truth, pain, and love. The world kept moving around them, but inside that moment, everything finally felt still. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that money can buy comfort, but it can never buy peace, love, or truth. Sometimes, life humbles the proud in the quietest ways, just to show that every person, no matter their past, can still change. If this story touched your heart, tell us what you learned from it, and comment where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real human stories like this one.